Cruelty often strikes where kindness tries to bloom. This is the story of Katara, a little girl selling lemonade to save her brother's life. She was laughed at, mocked, and humiliated until one day the thunder of Harleys arrived. Outlaws who carried scars and a lesson about dignity the town would never forget. On a scorching July afternoon, Katara dragged a battered folding table to the edge of Willow Street. Her hands were sticky with sugar as she poured pale yellow lemonade into a chipped pitcher. A cardboard sign written in her uneven handwriting leaned against the table. For Jonah's surgery, 50 cents a cup. Her brother Jonah watched from their porch, thin and pale, a blanket over his legs despite the heat. He managed a small smile, raising a hand in encouragement. Katara straightened proudly. Cars passed. Some drivers slowed, smiled, and waved. A few stopped, dropped coins into the jar, took paper cups, and wished her luck. Every coin clinked like hope. But Katara knew 50 cents at a time would take forever. The hospital bills stacked high on the kitchen counter told her so. Still, she stood tall, wiping sweat from her brow. For Jonah, she would try. What she didn't know was how cruel the world could be to a child's dream. Two older boys sauntered down the street, baseball caps backward, eyes full of mischief. They spotted Katara's stand and exchanged grins. "What's this?" One sneered, snatching the cardboard sign. "For Jonah's surgery." "What is he? Some kind of weakling?" Katara lunged forward. "Give it back." The boy held the sign high, laughing. 50 cents? You'll be here until you're 50 years old. His friend tipped the jar, coins spilling across the dirt. Katara scrambled, tears blurring her eyes, gathering every coin with shaking hands. Jonah tried to rise from the porch, but his frail body betrayed him. His voice cracked. "Stop, leave her alone." The boys mimicked his weak cry, laughter echoing down the street before they disappeared. Katara knelt in the dust, clutching the rescued jar to her chest. Her cheeks burned with shame, but her eyes hardened. She whispered, "I'm not quitting, Jonah. I'll stay here every day until we have enough." Her brother smiled weakly, though his eyes glistened. Neither of them knew that humiliation had just lit a fire far beyond their porch. That night, Clara Rayner returned from the diner where she worked double shifts. Her uniform smelled of grease and coffee, her hands raw from scrubbing dishes. She froze when she saw Katara counting coins on the kitchen floor. "Honey, what are you doing up?" Katara looked up, defiant. "We're going to help Jonah. I'll sell lemonade every day until he gets his surgery." Clara's heart cracked. She knelt beside her daughter, brushing strands of hair from her damp forehead. "Sweetheart, that's not your burden." "It's mine. But you can't do it alone," Katara whispered. "People laugh at us, Mama. They don't think Jonah matters." "But I do, and I'll show them." Clara held her tightly, tears streaming silently. She wanted to protect Katara's innocence, shield her from the cruelty of the world. But her daughter's determination was fiercer than exhaustion. Through the thin walls, Jonah coughed softly. Clara kissed Katara's head and whispered, "Then we'll fight together." But even her whispered promise trembled. She knew love alone wouldn't pay the surgeon. The next afternoon, Katara set up her stand again. The sun blazed and sweat soaked her shirt, but she stood proudly, pitcher in hand. A few kind neighbors bought cups, pressing coins gently into her palm. Then a group of teenagers on bikes swerved toward her. They circled the table, jeering. "What kind of scam is this?" One sneered. "Bet your parents just want beer money." Another kicked the table leg. Lemonade splashed across the ground, soaking the dust. Katara clutched the jar, her knuckles white. "Leave me alone," she cried. They only laughed harder, chanting cruel nicknames, mocking Jonah's illness, her family's poverty. From the porch, Jonah shouted, his voice cracking, but they drowned him out. Clara ran from the house, shouting at the teens. They scattered, still laughing. Katara's face crumpled as she looked at the ruined pitcher, coins sticky with lemonade. Clara pulled her close, whispering, "Don't listen to them." But Katara's trembling words revealed her wound. "Why does the world laugh when I'm just trying to help?" By evening, word spread. At the corner bar, men whispered about the little lemonade stand mocked by teenagers. Some shook their heads with pity. Others dismissed it with a shrug. At a shadowed table, a group of bikers sat in silence, leather vests heavy with patches. Their leader, Rogan Hawk, listened intently as the bartender muttered, "Breaks your heart. Little girl out there trying to save her brother and punks tearing her apart." Hawk's jaw tightened. He had seen cruelty his whole life, men crushing the weak just to feel taller. But something about a child's fight against humiliation stirred him differently. "Where?" Hawk asked. Willow Street. Blue house at the corner. The bartender replied. The bikers exchanged glances. Hawk stood, tossing cash onto the bar. Saddle up, he growled. Engines roared to life outside, and as Katira cried herself to sleep that night, she had no idea the sound of Harleys would soon thunder down Willow Street. Not to terrify, but to protect. The following afternoon, Katira stood again at her little table. The cardboard sign, patched with tape, leaned stubbornly against the pitcher. Her eyes darted nervously to the street corners, afraid the cruel boys would return. Instead, a new sound rose in the distance, a low rumble growing louder, heavier. The ground seemed to vibrate. Katira's small hands tightened on the jar. Clara stepped onto the porch, shielding Jonah with her body. Then they appeared. Motorcycles, dozens of them, chrome gleaming in the sunlight. Engines roared like thunder as 70 riders filled Willow Street. Neighbors froze at windows, mouths open. Children pulled back from sidewalks. The pack slowed, forming a line in front of the lemonade stand. At their head, Hawk dismounted, leather vest worn, scars across his arms, eyes steady and fierce. He approached Katira slowly, crouching to her level. "You selling lemonade, little one?" he asked, voice gravel but gentle. Katira nodded, lips trembling. "For my brother." Hawk glanced toward Jonah on the porch. His jaw tightened. "This street belongs to you now," he said. The sight of 70 Harleys on Willow Street shook the town. Curtains twitched, phones lifted, whispers spread like wildfire. Some neighbors muttered, "Trouble." Others felt a strange hush, like an army had come to guard a child. Katira stood frozen, her eyes wide. Hawk reached into his vest and pulled out a $20 bill. He placed it in the jar with a deliberate clink. "I'll take a cup." His men followed suit, one after another. Fistfuls of bills rained into the jar, far more than Katira had ever dreamed. A biker with tattooed knuckles gently lifted the pitcher, poured himself a cup, and winked. "Best lemonade I've had in years." Jonah watched from the porch, tears streaming. Silently. For once, the laughter filling the street wasn't cruel. It was loud, joyful, protective. Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. And for the first time since humiliation began, Katira's chin lifted. She wasn't small. She wasn't mocked. She was surrounded by roaring guardians, but cruelty doesn't bow easily. The same teens who had mocked Katira rolled back onto Willow Street on their bikes, curiosity painted across their smirks. When they saw the crowd of leather and chrome, their laughter faltered but didn't die. "Look at this circus," one jeered, forcing bravado. "What are you? Her bodyguards?" The bikers didn't move. Engines idled low and menacing. Hawk turned his head slowly, fixing the teens with a stare that could break bone. "You got something to say to her?" he said softly. "You say it to me." Silence. The boys shifted nervously, but one spat. "She's just a dumb kid with lemonade." Hawk stood towering over them. His voice dropped. "And I'm a man who doesn't tolerate cowards picking on children. You want to laugh? Laugh at me." The street went dead quiet. The boys paled, eyes darting between 70 unflinching stares. Their bravado cracked. Without another word, they turned and pedaled hard down the block. The bikers didn't chase. Their silence was enough. By nightfall, Willow Street was alive with talk. Some neighbors whispered gratitude, bringing over pies and casseroles for the Rainers. Others whispered fear, claiming outlaws had taken over their quiet town. At the diner, men argued. "They're criminals," one spat. Another shook his head. "Maybe, but today they did what none of us had the courage to do." Meanwhile, Katira counted the bills in her jar with shaking hands. It was more money than she'd ever seen, still far from surgery costs, but enough to turn humiliation into hope. Jonah touched her arm gently. "You did this, sis. You didn't give up." Clara stood behind them, overwhelmed. The roar of Harley still echoed in her chest. They hadn't just protected Katira. They had reminded the whole town of something it had forgotten, compassion. And while judgment lingered in the shadows, the truth was undeniable. Her little girl wasn't alone anymore. That evening, after the bikers dispersed, Hawk remained behind. He leaned against his motorcycle, watching the fading sunset over Willow Street. Clara approached cautiously. "Why? Why did you come?" Hawk looked at her, his eyes tired but steady. "Because I've seen the world laugh at the wrong people. And I've seen kids like her crushed by it. Not this time." He crouched down, meeting Katira's eyes again. "You're stronger than most grown men I've known. Don't let anyone tell you different." Katira's small voice quivered. Will they come back? The boys? Hawk nodded. Maybe, but if they do, they'll find us waiting. He placed his leather-gloved hand gently over the jar, then over her tiny hand. You keep pouring. We'll keep watching. Katira blinked up at him, fear mixing with relief. For the first time, the lemonade stand wasn't just a fragile table. It was a fortress guarded by 70 roaring angels on 2 wheels. 2 days later, the bikers returned, not in full force, but enough to shake the street. Katira was at her stand again, pitcher full, cardboard sign taped sturdier this time. Hawk dismounted, carrying a heavy envelope. He placed it on the table. Open it, he said. Inside was a wad of bills collected from members across chapters. Katira's eyes widened, hands trembling as she pulled out the money. For Jonah, Hawk explained. This ain't charity. This is respect for the fight you've shown. Clara's throat tightened. We can't. You can, Hawk interrupted gently. This is what brotherhood looks like. Neighbors began to step out, curious, some ashamed. They had passed Katira's stand every day but had never stopped. Now they watched hardened men honor what they ignored. Jonah, weak but smiling, whispered from the porch, Thank you. Hawk turned, gave a small nod, and replied, No, kid. Thank her. She lit the fire. That night, Clara sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope of money. It was enough to cover the first part of Jonah's surgery costs. Hope flickered, but unease gnawed at her. She turned to Ryan, her neighbor, whispering, What if they want something back? What if the town's right? Ryan shook his head. You saw it, Clara. They didn't ask for anything. They just showed up. Still, fear lingered. Society taught her that men like Hawk were dangerous. Yet Katira's laughter with them, Jonah's relief, and the way they stood in silence when bullies came, it didn't feel like danger. Clara pressed her hands to her face. She had fought alone so long. She didn't know how to accept help. But in the next room, Katira whispered to Jonah, I think we have angels, Jonah. They just ride bikes instead of flying. Clara closed her eyes. Maybe her little girl saw the truth more clearly than she did. The boys who had mocked Katira weren't finished. Humiliated in front of the bikers, they nursed their pride in shadows. At the gas station, they muttered angrily, fueled by cheap bravado. They think they own Willow Street now, one spat. We can't just let that stand. Another grinned wickedly. What if we trash the stand when no one's looking? Show her those bikers can't protect her every second. That night, they crept down Willow Street, hearts pounding, flashlights bobbing in the dark. They reached Katira's little table, ready to overturn it to smash the jars. But before their hands touched the wood, the low growl of engines split the silence. 2 Harleys rolled slowly from the shadows, headlights blinding. Hawk himself sat on one, another rider beside him. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He just watched. The weight of his silence louder than thunder. The boys froze, fear overtaking bravado. Their plan died before it began. The teenagers stood trembling under the glow of the Harley's headlights. Hawk finally dismounted, boots echoing against the pavement. He walked slowly, stopping just feet from them. You boys like laughing at children? He asked, voice low and calm. They stammered excuses, words tripping over each other. Hawk raised a hand. Silence fell. Listen close, he said. That girl fights harder for her brother than you'll ever fight for anything. You mock that, you mock every one of us. He gestured to the patch on his vest. And we don't forget mockery. One boy muttered, We didn't mean it. Hawk leaned in, eyes burning. Then mean this. You don't touch her. You don't look at her. You don't whisper her name unless it's in respect. Because if I hear different, I ride back. The boys nodded frantically, retreating into the night. Hawk turned to the stand, gently adjusting the cardboard sign. For Katira, the world had shifted again. The next morning, the story spread like wildfire. Some condemned the bikers further, saying they ruled through fear. Others whispered admiration because for the first time, the cruel boys were silent, the little girl safe, and her stand unbroken. At the diner, a man shook his head. Scary world when we need outlaws to teach our kids respect. But another answered quietly. Scary world when a child selling lemonade has to be humiliated before anyone steps up. Back on Willow Street, Katira poured cups of lemonade. With a grin that returned stronger each day, Jonah watched proudly, his weak body glowing with hope. Clara stood on the porch, envelope clutched close, realizing maybe her daughter's words were true. The bikers didn't come every day now, but their presence lingered like a shield. The town had been forced to look at itself, and in the reflection, it saw what cruelty looked like and what protection truly meant. And Katira's little table became something far greater than lemonade. One evening, Clara found Katira sitting alone at the stand, head bowed over the nearly empty pitcher. The day had been long, and only a few neighbors had stopped by. Clara's heart ached at the sight of her little girl's shoulders slumped in exhaustion. "Soft. You've done enough," she whispered. But Katira shook her head. "Not until Jonah gets his surgery." Her voice was fierce, though her small hands trembled. Clara knelt, pulling her into an embrace. "Sweetheart, you've already done more than anyone could ask. You made the whole town see him. You made strangers fight for us. That's more powerful than any jar of coins." Just then, the distant roar of engines echoed again. Hawk and a dozen riders appeared, parking in formation. He approached, handing Clara a folded envelope. "This isn't pity," Hawk said. "It's family. Every chapter pitched in. Your boy will get what he needs." Clara's tears spilled. Katira clutched her jar tighter, realizing the fight had not been in vain. The next morning, Jonah insisted on wheeling himself to the stand. Pale but determined, he looked at his sister and whispered, "Let me say thank you too." When Hawk and his men arrived again, Jonah lifted his voice. It shook but carried. "I want to thank you, not just for the money, for protecting Katira when I couldn't, for showing her she's not small." The bikers stood in silence, listening. Hardened men with scarred hands shifted, eyes softening. Hawk crouched before Jonah, resting a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Kid, you don't need legs to stand tall. You've got heart, and heart's what makes men respect you." Jonah's lips curved into the widest smile Clara had seen in months. Katira's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from pride. On Willow Street that morning, it wasn't money or motorcycles that mattered. It was a sick boy finding his voice, and a little girl discovering she'd built something unbreakable. A week later, surgery funds were secured. The bikers didn't vanish, but they knew their place wasn't forever on Willow Street. Still, Hawk wanted one last gesture. He arrived with a custom-built sidecar fitted with cushions and painted bright yellow, Katira's favorite color. "So Jonah can ride too," Hawk explained. The siblings gasped. Jonah's frail hands touched the polished frame as Katira squealed with joy. Clara's tears fell freely. That afternoon, engines thundered as Jonah rode proudly in the sidecar, Katira beside him, laughter spilling into the summer air. Neighbors lined the street, some cheering, some stunned. For once, Jonah wasn't the weak boy on the porch. He was a rider guarded by 70 angels of steel. Ryan, the neighbor, whispered to Clara, "No one's going to forget this." And he was right. Willow Street had never seen anything like it. A parade not of power, but of protection, rolling under the July sun. Weeks later, Clara sat in a sterile hospital waiting room, Katira clutching her hand tight. Jonah was in surgery, doctors working to repair what his fragile body had long endured. The hours dragged. Every tick of the clock was agony. Then the doors opened. The surgeon approached, tired but smiling. "It went well. He's going to need time, but your boy's got a strong chance now." Clara broke into sobs of relief. Katira buried her face in her mother's side, whispering, "We did it for him." When Jonah awoke, his first words were faint but clear. "Did they ride today?" Clara smiled through her tears. "They always ride, sweetheart. Even when you can't hear them." Outside, faintly in the distance, the low growl of Harley's echoed, not loud, not intrusive, just enough to remind them the brotherhood was still near. And Jonah, for the first time, drifted back to sleep with peace in his fragile chest. Months later, Jonah's strength grew. He could sit straighter, his laughter louder. Katira's stand was gone now, but its memory lingered, a battered table that once carried the weight of love, humiliation, and triumph. On warm evenings, Hawk would sometimes ride past slowly, raising 2 fingers in silent salute. Katira would wave wildly, Jonah grinning from the porch. Clara no longer saw menace in the roar of engines, only a promise that her children were never alone. Neighbors who once whispered in judgment now nodded in respect. The The story of Willow Street had become a lesson whispered to new faces about a little girl, a lemonade stand, and 70 bikers who chose to shield her. One evening, Katira asked softly, "Mama, were they really angels?" Clara smiled. "Yes, baby, just the kind the world doesn't expect." And in that truth, Katira understood dignity can be protected, love can roar, and sometimes angels ride on two wheels.